December 14, 2022. A construction survey in Lower Silesia uncovers what appears to be a rusted ventilation shaft protruding from a hillside near the village of WWII. Poland coordinates 50.68 thought-provoking 16.3 Beneath decades of soil and forest overgrowth lies a sealed bunker welded shut from within. Local authorities expect an abandoned Cold War depot, but as excavation teams expose the entrance, the steel doors reveal markings not in Cyrillic, but in German Gothic script. Eisenstahlwerk, betreten verboten. Inside, amid stale air and silence, a corroded crate bears the insignia of the Waffenamt and a date, March 1945. Within hours, Polish intelligence cordons the area. Days later, analysts decrypt fragments of recovered microfilm labeled Project Eisenstahl and realize they may have stumbled upon a lost node of Hitler's secret war technology program, one erased from all surviving Reich archives. Chapter 1. The Frozen Archives of Operation Eisenstahl, the first official record of what would later be known as Operation Eisenstahl entered the Polish State Security Archives under case file designation PLSWD 2022-479. At the time, authorities classified the finding as a potential ordnance containment hazard, citing the possibility of unexploded WWII munitions. The sealed shaft, 40 meters deep and cut directly into metamorphic rock, led into a reinforced tunnel complex extending beneath the Owl Mountains. Those who entered first, members of the Polish Military Engineering Corps, described an air so stagnant that their lamps flickered from condensation. The corridor walls were coated in resin, still tacky beneath the dust, and stamped at intervals with a 4-digit number 1227. It was not until 2 days into excavation that an officer uncovered the first evidence that the facility had been intentionally hidden from history, a bronze identification plate reading Oberkommando der Wehrmacht. Versuchsreihe Eisenstahl inside the main chamber. Archaeologists found the remains of a storage archive. 12 cylindrical canisters, corroded but intact. Inside, microfilm reels labeled with Reich inventory tags and a series of coordinates spanning from Silesia to the Austrian Alps. One label bore a chilling annotation in red pencil: Verlegung bei Bedrohung der Frontlinie, relocation in the event of frontline threat. Each reel was brittle to the touch, but technicians from the Institute of National Remembrance (IPN) managed to recover fragments under controlled atmosphere. The decrypted content revealed engineering schematics dated late 1944, corresponding to radio wave dispersion models, high-frequency oscillation tests, and advanced alloys resistant to magnetic interference. Yet what most disturbed analysts were the handwritten annotations signed simply HZ, a signature later matched to Dr. Heinrich Ziegler, an SS physicist presumed dead in 1945 and later rumored to have been absorbed into post-war Soviet research. In Warsaw, the discovery triggered an emergency review by the Central Archives of Modern Records. Classified under internal code AR-44 Eisenstahl, the documents aligned with scattered wartime intelligence reports, once dismissed as disinformation. One OSS memorandum from January 1945 referenced a network of subterranean facilities in Silesia conducting electromagnetic field experiments under SS supervision. No follow-up was ever found. The implication was clear. What Poland had unearthed was one of those rumored facilities, untouched since the Reich's collapse. By early January 2023, teams from NATO's Historical Research Division arrived on site. Their presence was discreet, unpublicized, and, according to local press, accompanied by plainclothes American personnel. The microfilm reels were transported under military escort to a temporary secure lab in Krakow. There, Dr. Emilia Nowak, a historian specializing in Nazi industrial logistics, made the first link between Eisenstahl and a classified post-war operation codenamed V-Resonanz, conducted by the Soviet 9th Technical Directorate in 1951. Her analysis suggested that the Silesian blueprints had been partially replicated in early Soviet radar absorption experiments, predating Western stealth research by over 2 decades. The deeper excavation of the WWII bunker revealed more than documents. Behind a collapsed concrete partition, divers located a sealed elevator shaft descending into a lower level submerged in groundwater. Pumping operations began in March 2023, exposing a chamber lined with steel conduits and remnants of cylindrical test apparatuses. each bearing stamped serial codes ESF44, ESF52. The chamber floor contained the skeletal remains of 3 individuals in tattered uniforms without insignia. Nearby, a rusted toolbox held a small black notebook encased in oilskin. Inside, neat German script catalogued experiment cycles, voltage readings, and the Phrase Übertragung erreicht 7. März 1944. Transmission achieved March 7, 1945. The notebook's final entry ended mid-sentence. When portions of the microfilm were digitally enhanced, one frame stood out, a grainy photograph showing a prototype aircraft fuselage with smooth, curved panels unlike anything produced during the war. In the background, 2 men stand beside measuring instruments. Analysts believe one may be Ziegler himself. Metadata on the reel suggested the photo originated from a test site near Hirschberg, modern-day Jelenia Góra. Polish investigators, joined by German historians, traced local archives for references but found only a single surviving report, an evacuation order from SS Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, instructing the destruction of an industrial installation of experimental significance. Meanwhile, journalists attempting to access the site met with closed roads, military police, and silence from officials. The Polish Ministry of Defense issued a terse statement. The facility is under evaluation for safety and cultural preservation. No further comment. Privately, however, leaked communications hinted at growing unease. A NATO field log, later published anonymously, noted that certain recovered materials display metallurgical characteristics inconsistent with 1940s production capability. No samples were ever released for peer review. By May 2023, the project transitioned to joint custody between Polish intelligence and a European research consortium known as Project Historia. Through painstaking digital reconstruction, the remaining reels were scanned and cross-referenced with declassified Allied intercepts. One coded message intercepted by British Ultra in April 1945 referred to Eisenstahl transport column proceeding south under priority order Omega. No Allied follow-up exists, but Soviet files from 1946, now accessible in fragments, reference captured German engineers interrogated in the Urals under Project Znamya 6. Their testimonies describe devices capable of scattering radar, frequencies through polarized metallic grids. The phrasing mirrors the Eisenstahl schematics precisely. In an off-record interview, an anonymous NATO scientist described the discovery as a missing evolutionary link between wartime radar countermeasures and modern stealth concepts. Another, more cautious, noted that without complete documentation, any reconstruction would remain speculative. Still, whispers persisted that one recovered sample of Eisenstahl alloy had been secretly transferred to a defense laboratory in Stuttgart for advanced spectrographic testing. The results, if they exist, have never been published. Local reaction in Wallim was mixed. Some saw the discovery as validation of decades-old rumors about Nazi bunkers beneath the Owl Mountains, long associated with the Ries complex. Others feared what further excavation might uncover. One elderly resident, 94-year-old Stefan Głowacki, recalled as a child hearing explosions in the hills in spring 1945 and seeing trucks with covered cargo escorted by SS guards. They said it was treasure, he told reporters, but the soldiers were afraid. They said what was down there wasn't gold, it was something that could burn the sky. In September 2023, an internal IPN memorandum marked confidential. Eisenstahl Phase 2 outlined plans to stabilize the lower levels and expand the search. Satellite scans identified further cavities beneath the complex extending nearly half a kilometer. Some contained metallic signatures inconsistent with standard munitions. Funding was quietly redirected from Poland's Ministry of Culture to the Ministry of Defense. Soon after, excavation abruptly halted, officially due to structural instability. Yet satellite imagery taken in December showed new fencing, floodlights, and armed patrols. By early 2024, all public reference to the find disappeared from official channels. The IPN webpage about the Wallim discovery went offline. Freedom of information requests were denied on grounds of national security. Only a handful of documents remain accessible, most heavily redacted. Among them, one decrypted transcript from a joint NATO-Polish meeting dated March 9, 2023 reads, "If confirmed authentic, Eisenstahl demonstrates an engineering sophistication that implies external collaboration beyond German wartime capacity. Recommend containment and review under Article 9. Whether external collaboration meant captured Allied research, Soviet exchange, or something else remains unclear. What is certain is that Operation Eisenstahl's rediscovery opened a window into a buried chapter of technological ambition and wartime secrecy. Beneath the concrete and corrosion lay evidence that the boundaries of science during the Third Reich extended far beyond known history, and that some of its legacies, sealed in darkness for nearly 80 years, may still echo quietly in the technologies of today. Chapter 2. The Vanished Submarine of Project Poseidon. On the morning of August 19, 2023, a Norwegian hydrographic survey vessel, RV Fram 2, conducting seismic mapping off the Reykjanes Ridge in the North Atlantic, registered an anomaly, a metallic structure nearly 2 kilometers long resting 3,200 meters below the surface at coordinates 62.174 degree N, 23509 decli W. Initial speculation pointed to a geological sensor array or an unrecorded wreck from the Cold War era. Within 48 hours, satellite tasking orders from NATO Maritime Command redirected attention to the site. By the end of that week, the anomaly received a new classification in Alliance databases, Object Delta 77. It would later become known as the wreck of the Soviet experimental submarine K-1299, part of a secretive research initiative once known only through rumor, Project Poseidon. The first descent, led by the Norwegian Marine Institute with technical assistance from the US Office of Naval Research, was recorded on video as the remotely operated vehicle descended through black water and particulate clouds. The silhouette of a submarine emerged, tilted on its starboard side, covered in white bacterial mats. The hull bore no visible pennant number or national insignia. However, near the conning tower, faint traces of Cyrillic letters spelled Poseidon 3. The footage was immediately flagged for restricted distribution. According to internal transmission logs later leaked, analysts noted structural dimensions inconsistent with any documented Soviet design: 86 meters in length, a narrow beam, and a propulsion assembly without standard exhaust ports. The vessel seemed to incorporate an experimental reactor module unlike any known configuration in the 1960s Soviet fleet. Subsequent dives recovered fragments of the outer hull for metallurgical analysis. Results conducted at the Bergen Naval Research Facility under Project File NOPS 2023. 1-18 described an alloy of titanium and beryllium, resistant to both pressure deformation and radiation corrosion, an engineering feat at least a decade ahead of the USSR's known metallurgy at the time. Within the partially collapsed command section, divers located a sealed container marked with a red triangle and the serial designation BPR-06, Только по приказу. Inside lay damp logbooks written in precise naval handwriting. Page 1 began with the date, 12 March 1962, and the name Capti, Dvoranga Adi, Korolkov. The entries described a mission departing from Murmansk under directive from the 9th Directorate of the Soviet Navy's Technical Bureau, tasked with testing reactor core stability under accelerated deep water conditions. The log abruptly ended 4 days later with the words Temperatura vyше normy, Prikaz молчать, temperature above normal, ordered to maintain silence. The recovery sparked immediate diplomatic friction. Within a week of the discovery, Russian state media denied the existence of any submarine designated Poseidon 3, insisting the find was an intentional fabrication by Western intelligence. Yet, private communications between NATO maritime commands referenced intercepted Russian naval transmissions acknowledging anomalous recovery operations north of Iceland. It became evident that both sides wanted control of the wreck. To minimize escalation, Norway declared the site a protected maritime archaeological zone, effectively closing access. But by October, satellite imagery revealed an unidentified Russian research vessel, Academic Komarov, loitering within 15 kilometers of the exclusion perimeter. In late October 2023, a joint Anglo-Norwegian team gained limited access to the inner compartments. They found something unexpected: a cylindrical module disconnected from the main hull, internally lined with lead shielding and surrounded by collapsed instrumentation racks. Within it, an intact core assembly resembling a miniature reactor, its central chamber engraved with the symbol of the Kurchatov Institute and a serial tag. Mk47PS3. Radiation readings were minimal, suggesting deactivation prior to sinking. The discovery hinted that Project Poseidon may have been an early attempt at small-scale nuclear propulsion, possibly a precursor to later unmanned underwater systems. Yet inconsistencies arose. The reactor's control interfaces bore labels not in Russian, but in German. This revelation forced investigators to revisit an earlier puzzle: scattered references in declassified Stasi and GRU files to capture German scientific teams working in the Soviet Arctic after 1946 under a project called Vulcan. A 1958 East German memorandum, long dismissed as forgery, mentioned advancements in marine nuclear application derived from earlier experiments conducted under Eisenstahl principles. When compared to the metallurgical data from the Poseidon wreck, the alloy composition matched fragments retrieved from the Polish Eisenstahl bunker earlier that same year. For the first time, the two discoveries appeared connected, separated by 2 decades, yet bound by material and scientific lineage. In December 2023, further exploration of the Poseidon wreck revealed human remains in the aft engineering compartment. Forensic analysis identified them as Soviet males aged between 30 and 40. No personal effects were found except for a single brass badge engraved Flot Eksperimentalny Otrjad 12, Experimental Fleet Unit 12, a division never officially recorded in Soviet naval archives. More startling was the presence of a vacuum-sealed envelope, still legible, addressed to the Directorate of Oceanographic Security, Moscow. The envelope contained 2 photographic negatives, one depicting the reactor core installed within the hull, and another showing uniformed officers observing from a deck platform under Arctic light. The back of the second image bore the handwritten note, «Мы построили тень, но не контролируем ее». We built a shadow, but we do not control it. Western intelligence agencies responded swiftly. Within weeks, British analysts at GCHQ traced mentions of Project Poseidon to declassified satellite surveillance from 1963, showing unusual submarine activity near the Kara Sea. One memo, stamped Secret Sea Dog 62117, referenced the loss of a deep experimental vessel, presumed sunk during nuclear propulsion trials. The USSR reported no such loss, but the description matched Poseidon III's dimensions precisely. Unofficially, some NATO officers concluded that the submarine's disappearance was intentional, part of a controlled operation buried by Soviet authorities after a catastrophic failure. The motivation for such concealment remains a matter of conjecture. By early 2024, the wreck site had become the subject of covert international negotiations. Norway demanded the right to complete archaeological documentation, while Russia claimed sovereign ownership under historical precedent. During these talks, a Norwegian diver working under sealed non-disclosure orders anonymously released footage to an independent journalist collective known as Black Archive. The leaked video showed the submarine's interior illuminated by ROV lights. On the inner bulkhead of the command module, words were scrawled in faded chalk. "Не возвращайся, do not return." The clip went viral before being removed under government directive, yet not before screenshots spread worldwide. Public interest surged, and once again, the authorities went silent. Independent researchers at the University of Bergen began examining declassified Soviet design patents. Among them, one document, USSR Patent 1071162, described a hydrodynamic masking system employing electromagnetic resonance. Though the patent contained no direct reference to submarines, the mechanism bore striking resemblance to the oscillation diagrams found in the Eisenstahl microfilm discovered in Poland. According to Dr. Nowak, who consulted on both investigations, Poseidon may have been the Soviet attempt to weaponize technology derived from confiscated Nazi research, an invisible weapon beneath the waves. Official acknowledgement never came. In March 2024, Norwegian authorities suspended all civilian dives, citing environmental hazards. Shortly thereafter, unidentified vessels began appearing intermittently above the site, transmitting encrypted transponder codes traced to Russian Navy auxiliary craft. The RV Fram 2's data logs were seized by the Norwegian Defence Intelligence Service and classified. By June, a terse statement from NATO's Allied Maritime Command confirmed only that a previously unknown vessel of potential historical significance has been located and will remain under secure observation. The remains of K-1299 still rest at the bottom of the North Atlantic, sealed in darkness. The recovered alloy samples remain in custody under joint forensic review, though unofficial sources claim fragments have already been distributed to defense laboratories across Europe. If true, the same materials once developed in a hidden Nazi bunker may now circulate quietly in 21st century military research. The ocean, once thought to have erased the evidence, has become a cold archive, one that refuses to stay silent. The wreck of Project Poseidon stands as a monument not just to technological ambition, but to the enduring secrecy of nations that still fear what might surface when history rises from the deep. Chapter 3: The Ghost Laboratory of Lake Vättern. January 2021. The surface of Lake Vättern, Sweden's second-largest inland sea, was locked in winter ice when a team of commercial divers from Linköping University descended to survey the remnants of a World War II aircraft. The sonar readout, however, revealed something far larger: a rectangular void in the sediment approximately 70 meters beneath the surface at coordinates 58.437 degrees N, 14,270 mi. When they cleared away the silt, they found a steel hatch welded shut. At first, the team assumed it was an ammunition dump from the Cold War. But when the first segment was cut open, a hollow draft of air escaped, air-sealed since at least 1958. Inside, they found a tunnel leading to a concrete corridor and a pressure door embossed with the Swedish crown and a serial marking, K9 1954, Försvarsmakten endast, military use only. Within days, the site fell under the jurisdiction of Försvarets materielverk, the Swedish Defence Materiel Administration. The divers' footage was confiscated. Yet word leaked. Local newspapers began reporting rumours of a sunken Cold War lab in Lake Vättern. Officially, the Defence Ministry denied any knowledge, calling the find an obsolete underwater depot. But internal memos obtained later under Sweden's Freedom of Information Act revealed a different story. An emergency response coded Operation Lumen, activated on January 22, 2021, tasked with the containment and evaluation of hazardous biological and radiological substances, potentially linked to historical military research. Inside the exposed chamber, investigators discovered a second hatch leading to a pressurized hall, roughly 20 meters long. Along the walls stood rows of cylindrical storage units, each labeled with a two-letter code, VB, CX, NG. Faded English stencils read, U.S. Army Chemical Corps property, though no record existed of American installations in Sweden. Nearby, a folder encased in oilcloth contained 37 water-damaged pages, typed in English and Swedish, bearing the heading, Joint Field Research, Facility K9, 1954-1959, Subject, Toxin Neurology Studies. The signatures at the bottom included both Swedish officers and US Army liaisons. Every name was redacted. As military historians reconstructed the documents, a disturbing narrative emerged. In the 1950s, Sweden's officially neutral government had discreetly cooperated with NATO allies on limited research projects involving biological and chemical agents. Facility K9 appeared to be one of these, a submerged lab designed to test nerve agent dispersal in low-oxygen environments. The purpose? To understand how chemical munitions might behave in Arctic warfare conditions. What made K9 unique, however, was its secrecy. The site was never listed in official inventories, and its funding trail was buried within Sweden's 1954 National Defence Appropriation under waterborne environmental safety experiments. Inside one of the sealed storage pods, investigators found glass ampoules still intact, their stoppers fused with crystallized residue. Chemical analysis revealed trace compounds resembling VX precursor formulas, decades before VX's official synthesis. The implication was that K9 scientists may have been experimenting with early nerve agents years earlier than recorded. Among the recovered materials was a lab, ledger labeled Lot Number 31B, its first page recorded sample. Preparation dates from 1956. The handwriting alternated between Swedish and English. One margin note read simply, adjusted per US directive, Lieutenant Column C. Hanley. A search of American records later revealed a Lieutenant Colonel Charles Hanley attached to the US Army Chemical Corps in Edgewood, Maryland, between 1952 and 1957. No record of his foreign postings survived. The Swedish government maintained silence. Only in March 2022 did officials acknowledge that hazardous remnants had been found. emphasizing they posed no environmental danger. Yet internal memos told another story. Environmental monitoring equipment installed around the lake began detecting trace phosphorus-based compounds in the sediment directly above the sealed facility. The readings corresponded exactly to the breakdown products of nerve agent testing. When confronted by journalists, a Ministry of Defense spokesperson stated the readings likely resulted from unrelated industrial discharge. Behind closed doors, however, officials debated whether to remove the containers or leave them entombed. Then came the breakthrough. A retired naval engineer named Lars Nystrom, who had served at Karlsborg Fortress in the 1960s, stepped forward with a personal archive. In a filmed interview for SVT, Nystrom produced a declassified memo he had obtained during a cleanup operation in 1972. The memo, dated August 4, 1959, was titled Termination of Joint Program K9. It ordered the immediate flooding and sealing of the facility due to uncontrolled reaction and unanticipated biological mutation in test series NG47. That phrase, biological mutation, sent investigators scrambling. What had been stored or perhaps created under Lake Fetton? Subsequent review of US archival data turned up nothing under K9, but one reference emerged from a redacted CIA technical report. Project North Star, Assessment of Scandinavian Biochemical Testing Zones, 1958. Among its appendices was a blurred photograph of an underground corridor bearing identical design features to those in the Lake Fetton footage. The report referenced Swedish cooperation in Arctic defensive bioagent evaluation. Though officially discredited, the documents suggested Facility K9's research may have intersected with US programs that were themselves controversial, including experiments at Dugway Proving Ground and Fort Detrick. In June 2022, divers returned to the submerged site with new safety equipment. The pressure door to a secondary chamber was cut open, revealing a room filled with rusted shelving, broken containment vessels, and a collapsed ventilation duct. On one wall, stenciled in English, were the words, Level 3 Biohazard, Restricted Personnel. The central table held a large steel container welded shut, marked with the Swedish letter sequence ng47. When radiation and toxicity sensors detected nothing, technicians lifted the lid. Inside, they found not vials, but paper, hundreds of sheets preserved in plastic sleeves. These contained handwritten observations of animal testing data, mice, rabbits, and one entry labeled Human Subject Non-Fatal Exposure 12-9. The signature beneath was Dr. K. Alm, 1703-58. Cross-referencing with historical personnel files identified a Karin Alm, biochemist employed at Karolinska Institute between 1954 and 1959, who vanished from public record in 1960. No death certificate exists. Public outrage followed once fragments of this evidence reached the press. Swedish officials denied human experimentation, claiming the documentation was fictional or training-related. Yet, declassified US communications painted a more complex picture. A cable dated May 15, 1960, from the US Embassy in Stockholm to the Department of Defense, labeled Secret Bio-Op 59, mentioned liability concerns arising from loss of K9-led personnel and unreported test casualties. It ordered that joint documentation be sanitized prior to NATO transfer. Within months, the project vanished from all records. By 2023, independent journalists and former military divers formed a group called Project Sjöskugga, Lake Shadow. Using side-scan sonar and magnetic imaging, they confirmed at least 3 additional sealed modules beneath the sediment near the primary site. Their report, delivered anonymously to European news outlets, claimed one chamber still emitted faint electromagnetic activity, suggesting residual-powered systems. Swedish authorities quickly dismissed the findings, labeling the data misinterpreted sonar anomalies. Yet satellite photographs taken later that year showed new construction barges positioned above the lake, working under floodlights and guarded perimeter buoys. Local fishermen reported hearing mechanical sounds beneath the ice. Today, Facility K9 remains under military jurisdiction, its exact coordinates withheld. What began as a chance discovery by divers has become a symbol of buried Cold War complicity, proof that even neutral nations participated in the shadow science of that era. Each newly declassified memo adds another layer to the mystery. What precisely was Test Series NG-47? And why was it sealed under 60 meters of freezing water instead of destroyed? The answers may still rest in the dark, pressed against the silt of Lake Vetton, where silence is maintained not by secrecy alone, but by the crushing weight of history itself. Chapter 4: Operation Paper Veil: The Erased Scientists. In February 2024, while conducting a digitization audit at the U.S. National Archives 2 facility in College Park, Maryland, historian Dr. Rachel Dunford encountered a batch of misfiled microfiche reels labeled Foreign Technology Division, Personnel Assimilation, 1954-1962. Initially catalogued as part of Project Paperclip's post-war scientist integration records, the reels contain metadata inconsistent with any known Paperclip personnel lists. One card bore a stamped header, Operation Paper Veil, Restricted, AEC Liaison Approved, 1955. The label was not referenced in any known declassification index. Within weeks, Dunford's discovery reached the Department of Energy's Office of Classification, which quietly invoked archival control protocols, resealing the reels under restricted custody, but not before digital preservation technicians captured partial frames, enough to confirm the existence of a covert program that had remained invisible for over 60 years. The images revealed lists of names, physicists, chemists, radiologists, many of Eastern European origin, their nationalities redacted. Column annotations included entry type B, status, asset conversion, and destination, NN21, the prefix NN matched. Designations used by the Atomic Energy Commission's Nevada operations in the 1950s, cross-referencing these with passenger. Manifests uncovered several individuals whose immigration records abruptly terminated in 1956. Among them was a Czech radiobiologist, Dr. Oskar Malik, last seen in Prague before his reported defection to West Germany. The newly discovered papers listed him as Subject 47B, NN21 Utah. No such location appeared on official Nevada or Utah test site maps. However, in the desert west of Dugway, aerial imagery from the late 1950s did reveal an unmarked complex identified in US Geological Survey data only as grid reference, 12Q473. It was erased from public maps in 1961. Over the following months, researchers attempting to trace Paper Veil encountered resistance, freedom of information. Requests returned standard denials citing national security. Under Title 50, the few surviving documents described a post-paperclip evaluation initiative focused on containment and assessment of critical assets from opposing block acquisitions. Decrypted shorthand from one 1958 memo read, Transfer of Category Red, completed via Operation Paper Veil, Omega Route. It became apparent that Paper Veil had been a second-phase extraction network, not for Nazi scientists, but for select Soviet and Eastern Bloc researchers captured or coerced during the height of Cold War espionage. Their transport routes, disguised under false immigration records, funneled through West Berlin safe houses, onward via RAF flights to Nevada and Utah under civilian identities. In March 2024, Dr. Dunford, under independent funding, traveled to Germany to consult the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz. There, she located a British Foreign Office memorandum dated 10th of May 1957. Subject: Transfer of Scientific Personnel, OPV Program, Clearance Level 4. The note referenced 24. East German technical specialists, relocated under AEC custodianship for evaluation in biophysical and radiological disciplines. Attached was an acknowledgement from the US Embassy in Bonn, signed by Colonel Richard Samuels, attesting that personnel are being reassigned for continued containment. The phrase continued containment reappeared throughout later correspondence, an ambiguous term hinting that these scientists were not simply hired, but confined. Researchers unearthed one particularly haunting document, Memorandum 16-448, Behavioral Compliance in Foreign Research Personnel, OPV Division. It discussed monitoring of cognitive and emotional instability following sustained radiation exposure in experimental volunteers. Under Subject Group 3 appeared the initials OM, matching Dr. Oskar Malik, handwritten beside it. Condition Terminal Protocol discontinued remains retained NN21. No burial record followed. Forensic genealogists later found no death certificate for Malik anywhere in Europe or the United States. It was as if he and dozens like him had vanished from existence. Further corroboration arrived when a partially declassified AEC site map surfaced under court order in 2025. The map showed an auxiliary test facility west of WWII, annotated Camp Harris, Experimental Biology Unit. Satellite alignment placed it precisely where grid reference 12Q473 once stood. Field surveys conducted by investigative journalists revealed traces of concrete foundations and buried electrical conduit emerging from the sand. A corroded warning sign read, "US property, no trespass, radioactive." Soil sampling detected cesium-137 contamination consistent with late 1950s fission experiments. More striking was the recovery of a rusted metal tag engraved NN21583. That number matched entries in the paper veil microfiche. By mid-2025, the National Security Archive obtained confirmation that Operation Paper Veil had been jointly administered by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology and the Atomic Energy Commission, with coordination through the US Army Chemical Corps. Its mission, exploit captured Eastern Bloc research, while concealing both the source and the means of acquisition. Scientists recruited under Paper Veil were kept off public rosters, working within closed environments to prevent disclosure. Those who failed to comply, or whose knowledge posed liability risks, were subject to containment protocols. The euphemism concealed the darkest implication: indefinite confinement or elimination. Among the fragments of correspondence preserved on the microfiche, one line read starkly, "Discontinuation is final and unrecorded." The rediscovery of Paper Veil triggered an internal ethics review at the Department of Energy. Yet as news leaked, the government response followed a familiar pattern: silence, denial, then quiet removal of digital traces. Journalists who sought interviews with Dunford reported unreturned calls. Her research page vanished from the university's website. An anonymous email sent to the Boston Herald from a Department of Defense IP address stated, "Paper Veil was never intended for public exposure. Termination protocols will be applied." 2 weeks later, Dunford announced her resignation. Citing institutional pressure, she declined further interviews. In May 2025, a whistleblower within the Defense Threat Reduction Agency supplied encrypted files to a European investigative collective, Factum. The data dump included scanned personnel records stamped OPV, Phase 4, 1961. Each page contained mugshot-style photos of men and women wearing plain laboratory coats, numbered rather than named. A marginal note read, "Subjects reassigned to Project Nemesis, Biogenic Isotope Trial." Cross-referencing, with declassified test reports revealed that Project Nemesis corresponded to a series of human radiation experiments conducted under the guise of medical isotope research at unnamed Western US facilities between 1958 and 1962. Many of those studies were later condemned by congressional committees in the 1990s, but none had ever mentioned foreign scientists as test subjects or as victims. One of the final Paper Veil documents, dated 1963, bore the heading Closure Directive. It listed 112 subjects, all coded with 2-letter abbreviations and redacted surnames. Handwritten at the bottom of the page, assets integrated, remaining liabilities processed. The signature, barely legible, was R. Samuels, the same colonel who had authorized their transfer years before. No follow-up was ever recorded. Yet an archival notation added later, in a different hand, read, "See file series NN21A, reopened 1978. That series remains missing from the National Archives inventory. Today, researchers piecing together Operation Paper Veil describe it as the missing bridge between wartime scientific exploitation and the biomedical abuses of the Cold War. The same machinery that once relocated German physicists under paperclip had evolved into a system for disappearing scientists altogether. Men and women who knew too much, spoke the wrong language, or carried knowledge that neither superpower wished to acknowledge. Whether their work advanced radiobiology, chemical defense, or covert weapons programs remains obscured by decades of redaction. What is known is that their names were systematically erased, their deaths unrecorded, and their discoveries absorbed into classified research still ongoing under different acronyms. Beneath the concrete slabs of the Utah desert, where sand drifts over cracked foundations, fragments of laboratory glass still glint in the sunlight. Geiger counters click faintly among the ruins. Somewhere in the archives of forgotten experiments lies the echo of Paper Veil, the ghost record of scientists who were brought to America, not for freedom, but for silence. Chapter 5. The Silence of the Baltic. Listening Posts. November 2020. Along the wind-scoured coastline of Paldiski, Estonia, a team of civilian engineers from Ellering Energy inspected decommissioned Soviet-era tunnels slated for demolition. The workers expected corroded fuel lines and outdated power conduits. Instead, beneath layers of concrete and sand, they uncovered a sealed bulkhead door with Cyrillic warnings. Vchod wosprzeszony. Objekt Vega. Entry forbidden. Object Vega. When the team breached the door, stale air escaped from a chamber that had been closed since the early 1980s. Inside were rows of equipment, oscilloscopes, reel-to-reel recorders, and a cluster of computer terminals still labeled with the insignia of the KGB's 8th Main Directorate. Power lines led into a rusted communications trunk running toward the Baltic Sea. The discovery would reignite questions about one of the Cold War's most elusive systems, the rumored acoustic surveillance network codenamed System Vega. By early 2021, Estonian authorities declared the bunker a restricted archaeological site. Digital forensics experts were called in from Tallinn University of Technology to analyze the decaying hardware. Among the debris lay stacks of magnetic tapes, many melted or fused together, each stamped with a serial number beginning with VG. Several bore faded tags dated between 1972 and 1979. One case, when opened under controlled conditions, revealed intact reels accompanied by a folder of handwritten log sheets. The entries documented hydroacoustic interceptions corresponding to NATO naval exercises in the Baltic, operations that, according to declassified Western logs, never officially occurred. As technicians restored the audio, they heard faint rhythmic clicks, followed by bursts of distorted voices in English. When the words were filtered and slowed, they revealed coordinates and phrases unmistakably belonging to NATO communications traffic, messages that had not been archived anywhere else. The discovery unsettled both historians and intelligence agencies. KGB archives opened after the fall of the Soviet Union contained no mention of a project named Vega, yet an obscure 1989 GRU training manual referenced subsea resonance, a Ray's V-class designed for long-range acoustic monitoring. The manual listed Paldiski among test locations. Researchers determined that the facility's communications line extended nearly 30 kilometers offshore to a submerged node, a listening post embedded in the seabed, encased in reinforced glass and titanium. Using remotely operated vehicles, Estonian divers located the node in 2022. Inside its casing was an array of piezoelectric sensors and, remarkably, a functioning power source, a nuclear isotopic generator still emitting low levels of heat. Its serial label, RIT-24V78, indicated Soviet naval issue, but the device type did not match any known registry. Recovered maintenance logs suggested Vega's purpose went beyond simple eavesdropping. Several entries described deep resonance tests, signal blending, and anomalous returns during frequency overlap. One technician's note read, "Western Fleet transmissions detected prior to emission." The implication was staggering. The system might have been designed to predict or mirror enemy sonar signals before they occurred, a form of acoustic interference or deception years ahead of its time. The tapes recorded sequences that, when analyzed by modern signal specialists, appeared to contain layered transmissions, voices overlapping as if two time-separated conversations had been recorded simultaneously. Whether this was a flaw, an artifact of the equipment, or a deliberate experiment remains debated. As details emerged, the Russian Ministry of Defense publicly denied any knowledge of Vega, calling the Estonian claims fantasy born of decaying Soviet scrap. Yet behind closed doors, diplomatic channels grew tense. In February 2023, NATO's Allied Maritime Command issued a confidential memo marked Eyes Only, Baltic SIGINT, Anomalies. The memo confirmed the existence of undocumented Soviet hydroacoustic infrastructure with potential archival intelligence value. It also recommended discreet recovery of signal media before unauthorized foreign actors could access them. Within weeks, unmarked vessels appeared near Paldiski's coastline, operating at night under transponder silence. Local fishermen reported hearing low-frequency hums beneath the water, steady, mechanical, like an engine running miles offshore. When Estonian security forces finally secured the coastal perimeter, they found several of the submerged cable routes severed and empty spools left behind. Whoever had tampered with the site had taken portions of the Vega system's data trunks. Forensic examination of tool marks suggested precision cutting with modern industrial saws. No records identified the vessels involved, though satellite imagery captured their heat signatures departing toward Kaliningrad. The theft effectively erased whatever unrecovered data Vega might have held. Still, fragments remained. Among the surviving magnetic tapes, analysts recovered one marked VG Red 1476. Its contents were unlike the rest. Hours of audio containing the continuous hum of sonar followed by bursts of static, then silence, until a voice in Russian whispered, "Не включай частоту 32. Do not activate frequency 32. Following that line, the recording terminated abruptly. Technical logs revealed that frequency 32 corresponded to an experimental channel Vega engineers had isolated for testing. On associated schematics, that channel was labeled Resonantsное okno, resonance window. Some researchers now believe the Soviets were experimenting with acoustic wavelengths, capable of masking submarines or manipulating enemy sonar images, effectively creating false echoes, a concept NATO would not fully develop until the 1990s. In mid-2024, the Estonian government quietly transferred the recovered tapes and hardware to a secure NATO facility in Brussels. There, acoustic engineers cross-analyzed the Vega recordings with declassified sonar archives from the 1970s. To their astonishment, they found a perfect correlation between the Vega tapes and 3 ghost signals recorded by British submarines in 1978 near the Danish Straits, signals long considered technical glitches. Vega had heard them too. More than that, it had predicted them. The engineers concluded that Vega's algorithms, or its operators, were capable of anticipating acoustic patterns seconds before they occurred, a feat theoretically impossible with analog equipment of the era. This left only 2 explanations. Either the tapes had been doctored after the fact, or the Soviets had developed a feedback-based predictive model decades earlier, one that Western navies never replicated. Publicly, the discovery was buried. Privately, it shook defense analysts. NATO intelligence briefings suggested Vega's design data could still hold value in modern sonar stealth systems. Russia, meanwhile, began sealing its own coastal archives, citing infrastructure modernization. In Paldiski, the bunker was filled with concrete, officially for safety reasons. Yet photographs leaked from inside before sealing showed technicians removing final crates of tape reels, their labels covered in black paint. No one knows where those reels went. By 2025, the story had faded from headlines, overshadowed by new crises. But among military historians and intelligence veterans, Vega remains a subject of obsession. A system built to listen had in the end spoken too clearly. The few recordings released to researchers revealed the mechanical heartbeat of the Cold War. Thousands of hours of submarines, engines, coded messages, and silence. The silence was the most haunting. Long stretches where the sea itself seemed to breathe. Within that silence, analysts still claim to hear faint echoes of transmissions that never officially existed, whispers of fleets that sailed without record, and voices erased by time. What began as a routine demolition in Estonia had become the accidental reopening of a Cold War ear pressed against the ocean floor. Vega's legacy is not only in the data it gathered, but in the questions it raised. How much surveillance the sea once held, how much still lingers beneath, and how many frequencies remain unacknowledged on every nation's sonar map. The listening posts are gone now, filled with concrete and sand. Yet the Baltic still hums faintly with their memory, a quiet frequency carrying the last secret conversations of empires who believed no one would ever hear them again.